Welcome to Season 2 of Tripod, the audio advertising podcast. In Season 1, we focused in on the creative aspect of audio. Do have a listen when you have a moment. But in Season 2, we're looking at the media perspective of audio. There's a lot of choices out there for reaching your customers using audio right now. Radio, podcast, digital audio. But which should you choose and why? And how do you use them to best effect? To help unpack that are three leading lights from the world of audio. Tom Balaam is audio lead at the agency Mindshare. Matt Rouse is podcast lead at Octave Audio. And last but not least is the co-founder of Trisonic and its media director, my partner in crime, Howard Bareham. I'm your host, Matt Hopper, and we're going to start in this episode by looking at audio audiences. There's been a real increase in audio audiences over the last few years. There seems to be a real appetite for it. 39.3 million people are listening to commercial radio every week. 12.4 million are listening to podcasts. So why is there an increasing appetite for audio? Why do people love it so much?
I think to give it some context, you have to go back about 16 years ago. There were 5 or 10 radio groups. And then in that period from 2007 to 2009, we saw consolidation. So what is now Global Radio bought Chrysalis Radio, who were the original owners of Heart and broadcasters of Heart. They also bought GCAP Media, who were the owners of Capital Radio, for example. And they also then bought, a few years later, GMG Radio or Audio Group, who were the broadcasters of Smooth Radio. So therefore, you've gone from having smaller groups to larger groups, and larger groups have invested or bigger pockets to invest. You saw EMAT Radio bought in 2009, I think it was, by Bauer, and bought all EMAP's assets, including magazines. And I guess the most up-to-date consolidation was in 2016 when News UK, so Rupert Murdoch, bought Wireless Group, who were the broadcaster of TalkSport. And I think what has happened over that period of time, slowly, but it has been speeded up, I guess, in some ways with technology, because everybody thought video would kill the radio star, which it hasn't, is that you saw bigger investment and consolidation in terms of, for things like syndicated programming. So you've had these bigger groups that have been able to invest in new talent, marketing, and make the sound of stations and more stations available across different platforms. So it stems back from that period of consolidation.
So it's down to the quality of the content, is it?
Yeah, I sort of agree with Howard. I think, obviously, these groups have, I suppose, to put it back to the old days when you think about the BBC and how they used to cross-promote themselves from sort of like Radio 1 on prime time. BBC 1 after EastEnders would say, tune into the Chris Moyles Breakfast Show on Radio 1 tomorrow. A massive captive audience that you could kind of get then. And that was something that obviously local radio could never ever do back in the day. You'd never hear a TV ad or see a TV advert for your local radio station, your local FM radio station. So I think that's been a massive step change in the fact that you will now see adverts for Capital, Heart, Magic on primetime ITV Saturday night viewing.
And we're going to come to podcasts in detail in another episode, Matt, but I mean, podcasts started just about 20 years ago now, and it was a kitchen table industry when it started. Now the big media owners are in on it too, so they're recognising the opportunities there too.
Absolutely, and I think that follows on from a couple of themes that Tom and Howard have picked up on there in terms of technology and talent as well. Technology has come on so far since all of that consolidation, so ease of access to audio has become so much easier to tap into that for an audience. So whether that's through your smartphone or through a smart speaker at home, people are they've got so much more choice and so much more access to it. And then also the investment themes in terms of the commercial radio groups that have come into this, the investment that they can put behind talent and technology, and also podcasts kind of exploding in the last 5, 6, 7 years. That talent needs an extra outlet in terms of what they can produce in the audio space.
Can it continue to grow?
There will always be a place for it. I think, particularly in podcasts, and I don't want to step on the wider audio themes here, but I think in podcasts, there are obviously huge names that participate in that space. big, the top of mind when everyone thinks of when they first think of podcasts at the moment is someone like Joe Rogan. But you have other larger podcasts, all fronted by big names. Those ones in particular, I think, are always going to demand a big audience just because of familiarity. But I think what podcasts also offer is that kind of niche environment for niche interests as well. So people find something that they're really interested in, really passionate about, and there's usually a podcast for that. So it's not necessarily about growing to the nth degree. It's like finding the right content for you as a audience member, but also, working out where you sit in a competitive space when you are launching a podcast, in terms of whether you're a big name talent or what kind of content you're putting out there, whether it's niche or got a bigger audience.
Tom mentioned about brands being associated or knowing what each of these stations stands for. You have to appreciate these are massive stations that have huge weekly reach. The Heart brand or Heart network is reaching about 10 million adults a week. That is huge. But I think the benefit for advertisers is of all sizes, whatever your budget is, because you have large advertisers, national advertisers or international advertisers that can access that 10 million audience or through a campaign have access to that station and on its platforms. But then on the other side, with other advertisers that have lower budget to spend or limited funds, there are lots of options to engage with those brands still. So whether that is through regional stations, and we're going to talk about it, I guess, shortly, is through other forms of reaching the radio audio listener for those that are listening, via a connected device, so a computer or a phone, which we sort of touched on slightly, in terms of doing smaller localized campaigns that allow, all advertisers, whatever your size, to access this audio audience that has, as you say, we've seen in the last, number of years, continues to grow.
I think in terms of just growth, it's, especially over the last sort of 5 years or so, it's been like a combination of sort of technology and circumstance as well, especially in the sort of commercial radio place. I think like latest stats were like 17% of all hours are via a smart speaker in a home. So technology, you mentioned it, Howard, that's been massively, it's been great in terms of growing those audiences for commercial radio. One of the key things you do is when you buy a smart speaker is listen to your favourite radio station. So technology's just brought easy access to radio brands, and hopefully long may that continue, and doesn't get blocked by the likes of Google and things like that, which I know obviously people like Radio Centre are going through government to kind of stop all that kind of thing from happening, which is really important if that growth is going to continue. But also, in terms of, we had the COVID situation and lockdown as well. It's something where as an industry, audio probably did, relatively well in terms of audience out of that, and it saw audiences sort of tune into, I think, the podcast world. I think definitely that was a step change for them and people discovering podcasts and trying and basically sort of sitting at home and turning their radios on, and that mood states that we talk about and things like this, finding audio that they want to listen to whilst they're either working from home or even slight changes in listening patterns and stuff like that. We've found that mid-morning growth of a listener now is like huge. It's become sort of almost the prime day part for listeners to kind of tune into audio or like listen to their favorite radio station. So that's been interesting as well. So yeah, I think all signs are growth can continue, but also I think we need to be wary of, especially for linear radio, how we're still going to get younger audiences to kind of tune in and not kind of go away to just the likes of Spotify and stuff like that, where they see bigger, younger audiences.
It's interesting. We talk about linear radio, digital audio, podcasts. They are three different things, but there's a move, certainly by Radio Player, for instance, in cars, to make it a seamless process. So someone searches for content, they don't really care where it comes from, do they? It's what they want to listen to, but they don't care whether it's linear, digital, podcasts.
Again, it's that technology aspect, bringing all of that together to make it that seamless experience, to know that it's not just a case of just flipping on your FM radio at home anymore. It's about having a device and the facility to be able to present you with this content, whether it's live radio, whether it's a listen again, whether it's a podcast, and it's all down to whatever you're interested in and tailored for you. And I think there is kind of that fragmentation a little bit. But if as long as an audience are being served content that they're interested in themselves, I think it's a really interesting space for audio to grow in the future, definitely.
But from an advertiser's perspective, they have to know, guided by the likes of us, where to put their ads to reach the audience they need to reach.
Absolutely. And, for us at Octave, we trade on the fact that we have a whole host of first-party data based on our audiences that listen and tune into our stations, because, we're backed by Bauer and News. They have a whole host of first-party data based on people being logged into not only their station apps, but also the magazine sites and the news sites that they have. So it's about applying that data to make sure that you're finding the correct audiences for advertisers. And I think this is a really interesting space for advertisers. I've worked in the commercial radio environment agency side for a long time before I joined Octave, and I know that audio felt like it would trail a little bit behind what was going on in that data-led world, that digital advertising world. And what's been happening in the last few years in the audio space really gives audio a chance to compete with that and be able to apply those results and those numbers that clients are so familiar with already when they're advertising in other mediums. I think it's, it really brings audio to the table and helps them compete in that sense.
Matt Rouse from Octave with Mindshare's Tom Balaam and Trisonic's Howard Bareham, and it sounds like audio is in a good place and set to grow further. But with so many media choices for advertisers, why should you choose audio? We'll be exploring that in our next episode, so make sure you don't miss it. Just follow or subscribe to the show. And for more details on all aspects of audio, you can find us at trisonic.co.uk.